I've always been proud of my son, Henry. From a young age, he had an inquisitive mind and a kindness that made him stand out. Even when faced with challenges, he approached life with a courage that could put many adults to shame. His epilepsy was no exception to that. Diagnosed when he was just 5 years old, Henry didn't let it define him, though it had a significant impact on his day-to-day life. Henry's early years were a mix of joy and adjustment. He was a curious toddler, always asking questions and finding new ways to explore the world. When the seizures first began, they were terrifying, not just for him but for our entire family. His first seizure happened during a family trip to the park. One moment he was laughing and chasing after a frisbee. The next, his small body stiffened, and he collapsed onto the grass. I remember the panic that gripped me as I ran to him, shouting his name. It was over in seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The doctors explained that epilepsy presents in many ways. Not everyone experiences the dramatic flailing seizures often depicted on TV. Henry's seizures were usually tonic, where his muscles would stiffen completely, and he would lose consciousness for brief periods. What was even more challenging were the auras, strange sensations that acted as warnings. For Henry, these included tingling in his limbs and sudden inexplicable smells or tastes. Despite the diagnosis, Henry remained resilient. He quickly adapted to taking daily medication and became incredibly responsible for his age. By the time he turned 10, he could recognize the signs of an impending seizure and knew how to take care of himself. As his parent, I did everything I could to support him while also teaching him to respect his condition. It wasn't always easy, but Henry never complained. Henry's maturity was evident in how he handled school. He loved learning and took his responsibilities seriously. Before starting middle school, we had a long talk about how to manage his epilepsy during class. I worked with his doctors to ensure he had a rescue medication in case of emergencies, a small pill that could prevent a seizure if taken during an aura. I prepared a special box for it, complete with a copy of the prescription, and ensured the school administration was aware. Middle school brought new challenges, including new teachers and classmates who didn't understand epilepsy. Among them was his homeroom teacher, Rebecca. I didn't think much of her at first. During the parent orientation, she seemed polite but somewhat distant. I brushed it off as her having a busy schedule. What I didn't realize at the time was that her ignorance would soon become a major problem. Rebecca was the kind of teacher who believed she always knew best. She often spoke in a condescending tone, especially when addressing the concerns of parents. At first, Henry didn't mention any issues with her. He was excited to start middle school and focused on doing well in his classes. I thought everything was going smoothly until the day of the incident. Started like any other school day. Henry woke up early, took his medication, and double-checked that his rescue pill was in his backpack. I reminded him, as always, to alert his teacher if he felt an aura and to take the pill as soon as possible. "You've got this," I told him, ruffling his hair as he headed out the door. That morning, during homeroom, Henry began to feel the familiar tingling in his arms. It was subtle at first, but it quickly intensified. He also detected a strange, metallic taste in his mouth, a sure sign that a seizure was on its way. Staying calm, he reached for his backpack, where the locked box containing his rescue medication was stored. Rebecca noticed him fiddling with the box and walked over. "What do you think you're doing, Henry?" she asked, her tone sharp. Henry explained that he needed to take his medication because he was about to have a seizure. Instead of helping, Rebecca grabbed the box out of his hand. "These are not for kids," she said, holding the small baggie up to the light as if inspecting it for contraband. Henry tried to explain that the prescription was in the box and that the medication was specifically for him, but Rebecca wasn't listening. "Oh, come on," she said dismissively. "You're a tough kid. You don't need this. You'll be fine." Henry's anxiety grew as the symptoms worsened. He begged Rebecca to give him the pill, but she refused. "You don't need to pretend to be sick to get attention," she added, walking to the trash can and tossing the medication inside. At this point, Henry knew he was out of time. His muscles began to stiffen, and he barely managed to sit down before losing consciousness. What followed was a tonic seizure in the middle of the classroom, with his body frozen in place. His classmates were understandably scared, but Rebecca stood there, frozen in shock, unsure of what to do. When Henry regained consciousness, he was disoriented and overwhelmed. He burst into tears, feeling both embarrassed and helpless. Rebecca finally stepped in, but instead of apologizing or showing concern, she told him to suck it up and insisted he was fine. When I received the phone call from Henry, I could immediately hear the strain in his voice. "Mom, can you pick me up?" he asked, his voice trembling. I had a seizure in class. I felt a lump rise in my throat as I listened to him explain what had happened. He was clearly trying to stay composed, but the emotional toll was evident. "Rebecca threw away my rescue medication, Mom," he added, his words punctuated by sniffles. "She said I didn't need it, and then it was too late." I told him I was on my way and hung up, my mind racing. How could a teacher, an adult responsible for the well-being of children, do something so reckless? As I drove to the school, anger simmered beneath my worry. I needed to see Henry, but I also needed answers. When I arrived, I went straight to the office where Henry was waiting for me. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from crying. I hugged him tightly, trying to offer some comfort. "You're safe now," I told him. "We're gonna figure this out." Henry hesitated, then asked, "Do I have to go back to her class?" I wanted to promise him that he wouldn't, but I knew I needed to approach the situation carefully. "Let me talk to the school," I said. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Before leaving, I decided to confront Rebecca directly. I found her still in the classroom, cleaning up after the lesson. The moment she saw me, her expression hardened. "Rebecca," I began, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to return my son's medication and apologize to him." She crossed her arms, looking completely unbothered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied. "That medication is dangerous for children." I threw it away. My anger flared, but I forced myself to remain calm. "That dangerous medication is prescribed by a doctor and was authorized by the school. You had no right to take it from him, let alone throw it away." Rebecca smirked. "Maybe you should pay more attention to your son instead of relying on pills to parent him," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. It took every ounce of self-control to keep my composure. "You endangered my child's life," I said firmly. "This isn't about parenting styles. It's about a medical condition that you clearly don't understand." She waved me off, muttering something about overreacting parents, and returned to her tasks as if the conversation were over. Realizing I wouldn't get anywhere with her, I turned and headed back to the office. The assistant principal, Mr. Clark, greeted me with an apologetic expression when I explained what had happened. "I'm so sorry to hear this," he said. "We take incidents like these very seriously." He called Rebecca to the office, and together we confronted her about her actions. To my disbelief, she doubled down on her stance, insisting that Henry didn't look sick and accusing me of over-medicating him. "I had to make a judgment call," she said defensively. "He seemed fine to me." Mr. Clark frowned. "It's not your place to make medical decisions for students," he told her. "The medication was prescribed for a reason, and you were informed of Henry's condition at the start of the school year." Rebecca shrugged. "I just think kids these days need to toughen up," she said. After some back and forth, she reluctantly agreed to retrieve the medication from the trash. Watching her dig through the garbage was a small victory, but it didn't erase the damage she'd done. Mr. Clark offered a temporary solution, allowing Henry to visit the office anytime he needed a safe space. "We'll work on transferring him to a different homeroom," he assured me. "But it may take some time." I thanked him for his help, though I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Rebecca's attitude was dangerous, and I worried about the impact she might have on other students. As I drove Henry home, I tried to lighten the mood. "We're going to get through this," I told him. "You're one of the bravest kids I know." He managed a small smile but didn't say much. I could tell the experience had shaken him. Over the next few days, things felt like a whirlwind. Henry was still recovering from the emotional toll of the seizure, but he seemed determined to move forward. He didn't want to dwell on what happened with Rebecca, but I could tell that he wasn't the same. He was quieter than usual, his confidence shaken. It wasn't just the seizure that had gotten to him. It was the way he had been dismissed, ignored, and treated like his condition was something that could be easily shrugged off. At home, we had several talks about how things had unfolded, and each time, Henry's frustration became more apparent. "I just wanted her to understand," he said one evening, sitting at the dinner table. "She didn't even listen. I told her what was happening, and she still didn't believe me. She didn't care." As a parent, it was devastating to hear. I had always tried to instill in him the importance of standing up for himself, but this felt different. How do you stand up for yourself when the person who's supposed to be looking out for you doesn't take you seriously? I spent hours reviewing Henry's medical records, making sure everything was in order. His epilepsy wasn't something I could afford to take lightly, and I wanted to ensure that the school had every piece of information they needed to support him. As much as I wanted to protect him from people like Rebecca, I knew that wasn't the only thing that had to be done. I had to make sure Henry's safety and well-being were the top priority moving forward. I decided to contact the principal directly. Mr. Clark had been kind and understanding, but I needed more. I wanted to ensure this never happened again, not just for Henry, but for all the other children in that school who might have medical conditions that were being overlooked. I asked for a meeting with the principal to discuss the next steps, and he agreed. A few days later, we sat in his office, Henry by my side, the tension palpable. "I've reviewed the situation," Mr. Clark began, "and I agree that what happened was unacceptable. Rebecca's actions were in direct violation of school policies and our responsibility to accommodate students with medical needs." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "I appreciate you acknowledging that," I said, "but what I'm concerned about is that Rebecca's attitude wasn't just a one-time mistake. She's demonstrated a lack of understanding of epilepsy, and I worry that she will continue to undermine children like Henry who require special care." Mr. Clark looked thoughtful. "You're absolutely right. I've already begun looking into other ways to address this situation. We're scheduling a meeting with the entire staff to reinforce our commitment to student safety and the importance of following medical protocols." I felt a sense of relief but also a deep concern. I knew that talking about epilepsy and medical conditions was one thing, but changing attitudes and perceptions was something else entirely. After the meeting, I went home with a heavy heart but a glimmer of hope. At least the school was taking steps in the right direction. Still, I couldn't help but feel that there was more to be done. I needed to make sure that this wasn't just swept under the rug. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to stand up for Henry. That's when I decided to file a formal complaint. I knew it would be difficult, but I also knew that it was necessary. It wasn't just about what had happened to Henry. It was about creating an environment where all children, regardless of their medical conditions, could thrive without fear of being misunderstood or mistreated. I spent hours gathering my thoughts and compiling the necessary information. I included a detailed timeline of events, the medical documentation about Henry's epilepsy, and the interactions I had with Rebecca and the school staff. The more I looked at everything, the more I realized how much was at stake. I sent the complaint off to the principal. In the meantime, I kept a close eye on Henry. He was doing better, but I could tell he still carried a heavy weight on his shoulders. "Mom, what if it happens again?" he asked one evening. "What if the next teacher doesn't believe me either?" I pulled him into a tight hug, trying to reassure him. "You'll always have me, Henry," I said softly, "and I will never let anyone treat you like that again. You deserve respect, and I'll make sure you get it." It didn't take long for the principal to respond after I submitted my formal complaint about Rebecca's actions. 2 days later, I received a call from Mr. Thompson, the principal of Henry's school. His voice was calm but tinged with urgency. "I want to start by apologizing," he began. "What happened to Henry is unacceptable. I want you to know that we are taking this matter seriously, and we are committed to ensuring that our school remains a safe and supportive environment for all students." His words were reassuring, but I needed to see action. He explained that he would be conducting a thorough investigation into the matter and invited Henry and me to meet with him the following week to discuss the incident in detail. While I appreciated his prompt response, I remained cautious. I had seen far too many instances where promises of action led to nothing. The following week, Henry and I walked into the principal's office. Henry was visibly nervous, clutching his notebook tightly. Mr. Thompson greeted us warmly and gestured for us to sit. "I want to hear everything from your perspective," he said, looking directly at me. I recounted the incident in full, describing how Rebecca had dismissed Henry's concerns about his seizure medication and treated him with a lack of understanding and empathy. I explained how her actions had left Henry feeling unsupported and humiliated. Henry, despite his nerves, spoke up. "She didn't even listen when I told her I needed my medication," he said, his voice trembling. "I felt like I didn't matter." Mr. Thompson listened intently, nodding as we spoke. He occasionally jotted down notes, but mostly focused on understanding our experiences. "This is deeply troubling," he said once we had finished. "I want you both to know that I take this very seriously. However, I need some time to gather more information before making any decisions. While I had hoped for an immediate resolution, I understood the need for a thorough investigation." As we left the meeting, Henry seemed slightly more at ease, knowing that his voice had been heard. The principal wasted no time arranging a meeting with Rebecca. A few days later, she was called to his office to explain her actions. According to Mr. Thompson, Rebecca vehemently denied any wrongdoing. She claimed that she had been acting in Henry's best interest and insisted that he had exaggerated the situation. "I followed protocol," she argued. "Henry needs to learn to respect authority instead of bending the rules to suit his needs." Her refusal to accept responsibility frustrated the principal. While he didn't directly confront her at that moment, he knew her response lacked accountability and empathy. This led him to take the next step, a broader investigation into Rebecca's behavior. Realizing that this incident might not be isolated, Mr. Thompson decided to speak with other teachers and staff members who had worked with Rebecca. He wanted to determine if there was a pattern of unprofessional behavior. 3 teachers came forward independently, each with troubling accounts of Rebecca's conduct. The first teacher described Rebecca as excessively harsh in her disciplinary measures. She often uses sarcasm and mocking remarks with students, especially those who are struggling, the teacher said. The second teacher recounted a specific incident where Rebecca ignored a student's request for help on a project. The student explained that they didn't understand the material, but Rebecca dismissed them, saying they should have paid more attention in class. The third teacher revealed that Rebecca often made demeaning comments about students who weren't performing well academically. "She creates an environment where students feel judged rather than supported," the teacher explained. These accounts painted a picture of a teacher who consistently failed to uphold the professionalism and empathy expected in her role. With these reports in hand, Mr. Thompson decided it was time to act. He met with the school board to present his findings and recommended that Rebecca's employment be terminated. The school board reviewed the evidence carefully and agreed with his assessment. Rebecca was informed of the decision the following week. While she protested, claiming that the accusations were unfair, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Her termination was immediate, and her access to the school was revoked. After Rebecca's dismissal, Mr. Thompson contacted the State Department of Education to report her behavior. He provided all the evidence gathered during the investigation, including the testimonies from teachers and the details of the incident with Henry. The department launched its own investigation into Rebecca's conduct, a process that could potentially lead to the suspension or revocation of her teaching license. Mr. Thompson's goal was clear: to ensure that Rebecca would not be able to teach in another school and put other students at risk. In the aftermath of Rebecca's firing, the school administration took proactive steps to prevent such incidents from occurring in the future. Mr. Thompson implemented mandatory workshops for all staff members, focusing on professional conduct, empathy, and supporting students with medical or academic challenges. These workshops emphasized the importance of creating a positive and inclusive learning environment. The school also introduced a new protocol for handling complaints, ensuring that students and parents felt heard and supported. For me, the outcome was bittersweet. While I felt a sense of justice knowing that Rebecca would no longer harm other students, the process had been emotionally draining. I was grateful for the principal's commitment to addressing the issue and for the steps the school had taken to improve. Henry, though still shaken by the experience, expressed relief that the situation had been resolved. "I'm glad they listened," he said one evening. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Together, we reflected on the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels daunting. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been a testament to the power of perseverance and the necessity of holding people accountable.